Hi, everyone. Firstly, wishing everyone a very happy new year. Hope everyone had a great time during holidays. Uh, Firstly, thank you so much for joining Sprouts LinkedIn Live. I'm Avi, I'm the co founder here at Sprouts.ai, and we are building an AI powered go to market intelligence platform. And today we are going to talk about modern playbook for outbound sales and pipeline growth in B2B SaaS startups. And to do so, with me, I have a stellar guest who is Joel, who is founder and CEO of Modern Outbound and Inbound. Uh, Joel has over a decade of experience in selling complex B2B products and mastering the art of starting new buyer conversations. I'm pretty excited to learn about that. And by the way, Joel has built a powerhouse agency that has generated over a billion in pipeline for 300 plus companies. That's massive, right? So his expertise are technology, like outbound technology, outbound techniques, email deliverability, campaign strategy, and that makes him a leading figure in B2B outbound sales. Joel, thank you so much for taking our time and talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Of course, excited to be here.
All right, so let's directly jump into the questions. Joel, you have built a modern outbound into a seven-figure agency in just 3 years and helped generate a close to billion plus of pipeline for B2B companies. What drove you to specialize in outbound sales and how modern outbound is different from regular outbound?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of it was luck in entering the market at the right time, and then
Mhm.
eventually we got pretty good at it. So those first few clients, it was a little bit rough, and it took some time to kind of sharpen the focus. But uh, I was always good at outbound, loved it. I like trying new things and experimenting, and that's a big part of outbound. Is and
Mhm.
for the people listening, like how many experiments per month are you running, even things that don't scale? But I used to do those things at my previous jobs. I was in finance. I was at big asset management firms like JP Morgan and BlackRock, and um, we're a little bit more restricted on what we could try at those big regulated firms.
Mhm.
But one thing I realized quickly was that I can't rely on other people to get me meetings. I was in a position where meeting flow was supposed to just happen, and I realized that that is not a good strategy. So quickly figured out some ways to get attention from prospects. And even at a big firm like JP Morgan, you still have to go through the motion of getting in front of people because everyone's time is valuable. So eventually realized, okay, I think a lot of companies need the things that I'm pretty good at. So why don't we go for it? Um, Outbound has changed a lot, and we could talk
Yep.
about that. But over the last few years, even from when I started, there were very few outbound agencies.
Mhm.
There were more like traditional SDR agencies that were more like body shops, which are fine.
Mhm.
There's some really good ones, but we built a more like special ops process where everyone here is good at one thing, and collectively we attack every client as a unit. And I think that that works pretty well. But yeah, we could talk about all the things that have happened in outbound in the last even 2 years. It's a lot going on.
Thanks for that, Joel. Like curious to learn how did you how what were the techniques that landed up you getting those 300 customers and building like billion plus of pipeline for them? Like how did you use modern outbound to get these customers?
I
And
we
would love to learn about the special ops in more detail.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. We ate our own cooking, so we did our own outbound. I did the same things that I did to, that I do for clients and that we now do for clients that's, operationalized. I did to get my first few clients. And I still do it now. I still run a lot of outbound for Modern Outbound. So outbound and referrals, that's been the big thing. And then also sharing on LinkedIn has been huge.
Mhm.
I don't know what the mix is of people listening on the call, if they're like in sales, if they're in marketing. But one thing that we could talk about, and I run a partner agency called Modern Inbound that really focuses on LinkedIn. So if you're in B2B, like there's so many great plays on LinkedIn that most people just aren't taking advantage of. Just by posting 3, 4, 5 times a week, that changed my business. So
Okay.
by that second year, I started sharing stuff on LinkedIn, insights, stories, learnings from the trenches, and that really built my brand organically, much faster than it did for I used to run ads. Nothing against ads, but that organic posting worked a lot better. So when I would mix organic posting with direct outreach on LinkedIn, so outbound there, cold email, that was the trifecta. That's what worked really well for me. So a lot of it is like, finding the right balance of the different channels that work for you. Those were great, and that to this day, that's what we lean on heavily outside of referrals.
Got it. And Joel, can you throw some stats in terms of people who do not frequently post on LinkedIn and do outbound? What is the typical response rates to their campaigns vis-a-vis, okay, if you're doing a brutal outbound, which is like age old, uh, what it can be specific numbers, okay, like you get 4x better response if you do a lot of posting.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any stats with you, Joel, in your experience?
Oh, it's hard to say. I would tell you this. Before I was posting, my connection rate was significantly lower. So
Got
when I
it.
would run outreach campaigns on LinkedIn specifically, and by the way, LinkedIn is a great channel to do outreach thoughtfully if it's done the right way. My connection rates may have been even 15, 20%, 25% on a good campaign if it was like a strong second degree list. But once I started posting, my connection rate like doubled. And I don't necessarily know if that's directly connected to like posting, but I have to
Mhm.
believe there's some good brand building that's happening there.
Got it.
So typically for my campaigns on LinkedIn, I'm getting 35, 40, 45, 50% accept rates with at least 20% reply rates. It also helps my reply rate. So when they see me in the news feed, right, the
Mhm.
LinkedIn feed, um, you don't have to be an influencer for people
Yep.
to at least have heard of you to say, oh, I've seen, like, he's a real person. He has insights. He's not just selling stuff on the feed. Don't just sell things on the feed. But it's okay to do some pitch slapping in the inbox if it's good and if it's personalized and thoughtful. That's a big if.
Yep.
But if they've heard of you, then great. My response rates kicked up significantly. Um, yeah. So we could talk about ways that I use cold email with that as well.
Yep. Joel, moving on to the next question, right? What are the core components of your modern outbound playbook, right? And how should one think about different strategies between if they are in 0 to 1 journey, 1 to
Mhm.
10 journey, or 10 plus journey, right? I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure it changes from when you are like very early stage to slightly scaled and then eventually growth stage. How does the playbook differ, right?
Mhm.
Like what are the tactics you recommend that one should focus on?
Yeah. If you're 0 to 1, and I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that are 0 to 1,
Yep.
infrastructure doesn't matter as much. It's okay
Mm-hmm.
to do things that don't scale. It's okay to run 1 or 2 campaigns at a really low volume just to get your feet wet. Um, there's a lot of people are having issues with email deliverability as a whole. Big
Yep.
marketing teams, small marketing teams, individual found like people are really struggling with deliverability. If you're going 0 to 1, don't get bogged down by that. I would try if your company has another domain that you can use and you're just getting started, or maybe you're just doing it for yourself, like send 30, 40, 50 cents a day on a domain, space out the emails, make sure that you're sending as few as possible per hour, and just try your 2 highest conviction ideas. Don't worry so much about the fancy infrastructure. Once you go from 1 to 2 and like you're trying to scale up, I think that outbound kind of becomes like an investment portfolio where you've got your really like high volume stuff that is
Mm-hmm.
always running in the background and building awareness and starting conversations, and then for 10-20% of the portfolio, maybe that
Mm-hmm.
has the highest upside, you would do the stuff that doesn't scale. But you need really good email infrastructure for that. You need multiple domains, subdomains. So it kind of depends on where you're at in the journey. But if you're just going 0 to 1, like just get started. Just make sure you're doing it every day. Like consistency compounds.
Got it. Got it. No, you brought a very interesting point, Joel, which is email infrastructure. With now, what we are seeing is with the stricter server protocols by Google and Microsoft, making cold emails more challenging. You have also in your recent post emphasized that, right? Like you have to do few tactics like frequent campaign resets, IP monitoring, rapid domain reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate more? And if there is a checklist, Joel, which one should follow
Mhm.
That would be of a great help.
Mhm.
Or if you can also talk about some approach, right? Okay, if I'm just starting to set up my email infrastructure, okay, these are like set of 5 things I need to, it needs to be done. And
Mhm.
if I'm scaling to, let's say, 50K email, or let's say 5K email a month or a quarter basis, what all things I should do, right? Like
Mhm.
how I can change IP rotation and domain rotation. So would
Mhm.
love to learn more about that.
So what I would say this, like email infrastructure is very important and it always has been, and it's always been very complicated. But what's
Mhm.
happening now, and the reason why people are struggling, isn't even necessarily the infrastructure itself. It's the fact that servers are much more discerning with the copy. You used to be able to get away with like generic copy, maybe a
Mhm.
generic list. But now they have AI algorithms, like Microsoft is deploying it, Google's deploying it. There's 200 plus providers, like email service providers. Certainly, like Proofpoint and Mimecast are very difficult to get inside of. Um, but the copy is being scrutinized more heavily than it ever has been.
Got it.
So you just can't get away with generic copy. If it's like kind of a me email, here's what we do, here's who we serve, do you have 30 minutes? That hasn't worked for a long time. But at least 2 years ago, you could still get in a bunch of primary inboxes with that. And maybe you get one or two hits a week, right? But now, if the servers sniff that out, they're going to sniff it out a lot quicker. You're out of the game. So infrastructure, like we could talk about the checklist, like set up secondary domains.
Okay.
Pro tip, have subdomains under those secondary domains so that you could rotate it, kind of like
Mhm.
a pitcher in baseball. Like you've got an
Yep.
active pitcher, you got a backup that's warming up in the bullpen. You should have
Yep.
backups that are ready to sub in. And when you have subdomains, you have more of those pitchers, which is great. Do it on several domains. Um, Diversify the server that you're sending from, like and the email service provider. Like do some Google, maybe Microsoft, maybe SendGrid, an SMTP server.
Mhm.
um, Rotate that. If you want to get really fancy with it, there are ways that you can match MX records so that like if you're sending from Microsoft, it's to Microsoft, because Google to Microsoft right now is very difficult. Um, Even Microsoft to Microsoft is difficult, but Microsoft's being very hard on the senders. So
Yeah.
you might want to like, there are some ways and there are some tools. Instantly does this a little bit, and there are
Mhm.
some private servers that offer the service where you could like match it based on the provider.
Mhm.
Um, Go really low volume on several domains. You don't need 100 domains. Like just
Yep.
go low volume on like 5 or 6 domains,
Mhm.
space out the emails, do a lot of A/B testing so that you could
Mhm.
figure out what's working, but also so that the server sees multiple templates and they don't see
Mhm.
the same template going out over and over again. That's a
Mhm.
big problem. They'll
Mhm.
sniff that out really quickly. They have very fancy AI algos. Um,
Mhm.
so A/B testing is for that reason too. Um, have mail warmers in the background, like giving you spam scores. Don't send from the same domain if it's not performing, like a mail reach or a warmly or like, I think Lemwarm. Like there's a bunch of tools that do the same thing and they generate a spam score. Like you should have someone on your team, if it's not you, whoever's
Mhm.
listening, like that's checking those scores at least every 3 days to see how they're
Every
doing.
got
Every
it.
3 days, at least twice a week, just so that
Mhm.
you could get a feel. Okay, like this has dropped off. The spam
Mhm.
score is now a little higher. The deliverability is lower. At the very least, like lower the volume, throttle it down, and figure out how to get a backup in there, a backup subdomain. But again, it goes back to the copy. Like my CTO is a deliverability expert, obviously, but
Oh,
he's very much of the belief that these days, especially in the last 6 months, like it's very copy driven. Um, Servers are just getting smarter.
got it. Got it. One very tactical question, Joel, is you talked about volume, right? Maintain that volume. What do you recommend is an optimal volume per day per user for sending out emails, right? Like, what is your recommendation?
I think if you know what you're doing and you're really an engineer with this, you
Mm.
could get away with several hundred a day. Like our agency, for a lot of clients, we're sending 700, 800, 900, 1,000 a day, but that's
Okay.
because we have a full team that's doing it and
Mhm.
managing the back end. I think if you're just an individual contributor, you should try and get out 100 a day.
Got it.
And maybe
Okay.
it's 50 that are automated, Maybe it's 50 where you're using Clay and Apollo to like really hone in on a perfect target list. But I would say try and get at least 100 a day to your
100.
ICPs.
Got it.
Yeah.
You mentioned a very important point, Joel, right? That uh, deliverability is also directly, proportional to the copy or the email content which is going out, right? Like, is it safe to assume that if you are personalizing your content at a user level, the probability of getting higher deliverability and intent better response rate, is that a safe statement to make?
I don't know that it is. I don't know that it is. And I can give you some examples with it. Like it's interesting. We have a client that is they place engineers based in LATAM and South America, and they place them with US based companies. And you would think, and obviously that's like the staffing space, which is a very competitive space.
Yep.
Like the automated campaigns are doing better than the hyper personalized ones. And there's a
Okay.
lot of examples like that. And we would, for example, we went into Clay and we found founders in the US who live in the US, but they graduated from a LATAM based university and a top 50, let's say a top 20, I think it was a top 20 list, top 20 universities in LATAM. So in Brazil and Argentina and I think in Mexico we looked at, and they were based in the US. And we referenced that in the email, hey, so there's a connection there. You graduated from somewhere in LATAM. We place LATAM engineers with US companies. There's the fit, right?
Yep.
That campaign didn't do well, didn't get responses. Not to say that it wasn't a good idea. I'm glad that we tested it. So I think you should always be experimenting with those ideas. But
Mhm.
the automation worked better.
Got it.
Sometimes just going really basic, like the LinkedIn campaigns that we run for them, we're going
Mhm.
after newly appointed CTOs at a company where they're adding engineers at a decent rate.
Mhm.
They're in the tech space, like let's say it's med tech or fintech. We break those out campaign by campaign so that we could
Mhm.
test vertical or industry comparison. Those do better.
Got
Um,
it.
so yeah, I think personalization is great, but I would personalize to their problem. Like if you feel like you intimately understand their problem and their day to day, I think that's going to win ultimately.
Got it. Got it. No, you mentioned a very, very, very important point, like personalized to the problem. And Joel, if you want to like scale personalization, right? What are some pro tips for scaling hyper personalization campaigns, right? Like how can one think about running this campaign at scale?
Yeah. I think the key to scaling personalization is understanding its place in your outbound ecosystem
Mhm.
because it doesn't really scale. The reality is it just doesn't. I mean, 10 to 15% of your campaigns should be personalized. And by that, I mean, it is a focus list of maybe like 30, 40 accounts. It is
Mhm.
maybe very specific people that you saw that attended an event. And it was a specific kind of event, and you made sure they're the right title, they're the right decision maker, and like you're reaching out with a very specific message. Like it doesn't scale in that, like it scales, I guess it's fairly easy to build that list once you have it and to like write some copy for it, but that list will end in a couple days, it's over. So to me that doesn't really scale. What really scales is when you have several hundred names that are constantly being added to a sequence that's performing well. I think you need both. I know that's not the most like satisfying answer, but I think
No,
in every
that makes complete sense.
yeah, sometimes it doesn't scale. If you're like, hey, I need to get 20 leads this month. Like that's what let's say you're saying your manager wants you to get that. You need 10 meetings. Like 4 or 5 of those meetings should come from something that's highly personalized, where you found them on Sales Navigator, you
Hmm.
have the Apollo Chrome extension or some other tool that you use, you move them into a sequence, you connect with them on LinkedIn, you send them a note, and you tell them that you found them on LinkedIn and why that is relevant. Like, it doesn't have to be the most mind blowing message, but it should be short and to the point. And it's okay if it doesn't scale. If you can do that 10, 15 times a day, that will compound over time.
Got it. Got it. You talked about a very interesting point, Joel, is accounts, right? Like targeting certain accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the step change happens when you run a outbound campaign is breaking into enterprise accounts right
Mhm.
now, what are a few strategies or few tactics you recommend to us when breaking into enterprise accounts? Because there it becomes more challenging.
Yeah.
In my personal experience, it's two pronged. Number one, there are multiple decision makers. Number two, it is a complex org, right? And
Mhm.
it's a big org, right? Like, so how to reach out to most relevant persona with what messaging, right? That's really, really challenging, right?
Mhm.
So in your experience, how should one think of outbound campaign from modern outbound perspective when breaking into enterprise account?
Hmm. It's a good question. And there's a few directions to go in, but I think what it comes down to is the following. If you're going after enterprise, unless you're reaching out to the CEO of Nike, which you're not going to do because that's kind of like a waste of time. I mean, maybe you could try to talk to the EA first. You're going to be talking to employees, like
Mm-hmm.
people that like just have a job, like they work there 9 to 5, they go home, like they have a whole other life, like this isn't their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of changes when you talk to like a startup and you're reaching, or a small business where you're reaching out to the COO or the CEO or the president or maybe the head of HR or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
At a small business or a startup, yes, it's a job for them,
Yep.
but they're more likely to be strategic about the business. Like you're going to be able to, you can get away with even more generic messaging there in a lot of ways to a really small business or a startup. Like not generic, but speak to the problem and assume that they care about it. But when you
Yep.
go after enterprise, you can't assume that they care about it.
Yep.
There has to be like a selfish incentive. What's in it for them as the mid-level HR manager at Nike? Like, what is the mid-level HR manager at Nike? What do they care about? Do they care about Nike's growth? Like, they probably don't really care that. Like, they don't care that much. Like, Nike's going to be fine. But what do they selfishly care about the most? I would really key into that. And I think you should do that with startups and small businesses too, but it's even more important at the enterprise level. Like understanding that they're a cog in the wheel.
Yeah.
Speak to the cog, like cogs specifically, and how this is going to help them slightly maybe look a little bit better in front of their peers, maybe get a possible promotion, understand what their KPIs are on a very detailed level, and speak to one or two of those KPIs if you can as a
Got it.
mid-level manager. I would also look at the 5 decision makers at that account, and they should
Mm.
each be in 5 different sequences because the reality is they all probably care about different things. So if you're going to
Ab-
put all of them in the same thing with generic messaging at the enterprise level, it's probably not going to work.
And
Whereas,
and and I believe you'll end up burning the leads if you're sending a generic message.
yeah, you're going to burn through. It's not going to resonate. Their firewalls are also going to be a lot harder to get through. They've got fancy IT teams that are going to block your email. So I think
Mm.
you'll want to go multi-channel and try to connect with them on LinkedIn, try to email them. You might be able to get away with an email-only campaign um, for a startup, but it's going to be tougher to do that with enterprise.
Got it. Got it. Joel, like double clicking on enterprise part, right? Like you mentioned about mapping a user to a pain point, and the communication should resonate with that pain point or pain point slash KPIs, and that is where you can have some shot to get a response.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from email, LinkedIn, what other tactics, marketing tactics, outbound
Mm.
tactics you recommend for
So,
enterprises? Because
I'll,
I just to like end this, like I keep on getting this, hey, why don't you do roundtables, why don't you go and meet them at the events, uh, why don't you send them personalized gifts, like what has worked for you, for apart from email and LinkedIn? Would love to learn.
So I can give you experience like when I primarily work with small businesses and startups, but I used to really focus on enterprise. So we have a lot of tactics we do for our clients for enterprise. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of it is insights based. And I
Okay.
applied the same thing with my old job. Like when I was at BlackRock, I'd sell to like big institutions and I would call the same people like over and over again. Like I did a lot of warmish calling because they kind of heard of me.
Yeah.
I called them last quarter and I'm calling them again. But if you're calling someone every quarter, you can't just call them and sell them. You have to like give them something new. So I would
Yep.
try to, so at a BlackRock, I would share market insights. Here's some different asset allocation ideas that you might want to think about. Here's what's going on in Europe. Here's what's going on in the equity markets in the US. and I would just basically be a resource. It was inherent, it was implied that I was wanting to sell them investments, right? Mutual funds and ETFs. But obviously, we all knew that. But I would just call them and share ideas. So if you can do that, if you have a Focus 100 list, you should absolutely have a Focus 100 for enterprise. Have your primary decision maker go for no. Like get them to tell you, like you need to hear directly from them that you should absolutely not reach out. And if it's not now, should I talk to you next year? Is there somebody else? There's a lot of turnover at enterprise too. So if they told you no, there's a new person in that role that might be willing to hear you out. So
Yep.
don't get discouraged if like the decision maker tells you to, F off. Like because the reality is they're probably going to be out of that role in a year.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
so you own the account, right? Focus on the account. And if that means you need to call them and email them and LinkedIn them every month and just say like, hey, I'm here. This is a couple of things that we learned. I'm a domain expert, and obviously this depends on the product or service.
Mm-hmm.
Just like one way value. That's it, right? Don't expect anything in return. Eventually things will work out.
Got it. Got it. Got it. No, that's a pretty good insight, Joel. Uh, what advice would you give to startups who are looking to build their first outbound sales team? Right, like what qualities or skills should they prioritize when hiring? Right, like hiring is a big challenge. There are only few people who are really good at outbound, and how one should think about if they are building their okay, so let me put it this way, right? Like if they are hiring their first outbound rep, what are the qualities and skills they should look for or optimize for?
Yeah, I think in this modern day in 2025, that rep, it's okay if they're inexperienced, like with selling, but they have to be very tech curious,
Okay.
very tech curious, like interested in the engine, like how does it work, like how do domains work, how do mail, like um, what sequencer should we use, like how do we stack up a bunch of data platforms, like how does the stack work, how does it pipe into the CRM, like someone that is extremely curious and can tinker. You kind of need someone that can really like tinker with things because inevitably like the game plan is going to change. It used to be like an entry level rep could just like get like a list of people to call and a cup of
Mm-hmm.
coffee and like that was all you needed. Like I think that the role demands a lot more than that. So like if you're a founder, if you're building a sales team like in an outbound engine, I would build someone who can build that engine, who has experience, and then bring in like a person that can operate and use the engine on a daily basis. It's not often that that's the same person. It's usually two different people, but you
Mm-hmm.
might get lucky and you can find like a really tech savvy, young kid that can figure it out. I haven't seen that very often, but it could happen. At the very least, you should have like a RevOps person that is a little more experienced that understands like email infrastructure. Um, but yeah, it isn't necessarily rocket science. It doesn't have to be rocket science. You just need someone focused on it.
Got it. Got it. Got it. No, point taken. Like somebody who can tinker with tools and somebody who can do very massive A/B experimentation and who's very curious naturally, right?
Yeah.
Will be a very good fit.
I would also say someone that can have a mini intro call on the spot. Like I think
Okay.
the days of having like an SDR that just calls to book meetings, like I don't know if I guess at one point that worked. It must have because there's a whole
Mm.
industry in it. But I think now if you get someone on the phone, the connect rates are so much lower than they used to be. Like you better be ready to have like a real conversation where they walk away having learned something. Um, because if you get someone on the phone, that's your shot. You may never get them on the phone again, you know?
Yeah.
So whoever you hire, or if you're the one listening that's thinking, like, I would really understand the service, the industry, the domain well enough so that you could have a conversation on the spot.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Joel, we are like about time, but before you drop off, one last question, which
Sure.
is how do you see AI and automation evolving in outbound sales strategies in 2025, and what role will human creativity play alongside these technologies, right? Like
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's like the positive and negative. I think you're going to see a lot of bad automation happening with AI and people that are attempting to write copy using AI. But I think the best ways people are using AI is in tools like, well, not to name specific tools, but I think it's more of like a framework where you use AI to teach you things. Like if you want to understand specific pain points of a specific role in a specific industry and then help that drive your copy, that's great. If you wrote an email, you throw it into GPT-4 or Claude and you let like really GPT-4, which is what I use it for, to maybe like sharpen it up a little bit. Um, use it to take out any spammy words, things like that. I would use it to prompt you, not to like write your messaging. There's a lot of AI agents right now. I think, I don't know. I think use it as an internal tool
Yes.
to like remind you to follow up with somebody, teach you something, prompt it with the right questions. I think that's where you'll see more of it in 2025.
Got it. Got it. No, this was a very very insightful conversation, Joel. I am walking away with a lot of information which I'm going to implement myself, right? And I'm pretty sure
Great.
everyone who have joined has loved it too.
I hope so.
Again, thank you so much for joining Sprouts Weekly Live, and looking forward to connect with you soon, Joel. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for the talk.